It's Get Outta Here. I'm Warren Levinson.
My sermon today, said the Reverend Jones, is baseball and whence it came. If you take the good book and you take a good look, you will find the first baseball game. It says Eve stole first and Adam second. Solomon umpired the game. Rebecca went to the well with the pitcher, and Ruth in the field made a name. Goliath was struck out by David. A base hit made on Abel by Cain. And the prodigal son made a great home run. Brother Noah gave checks out for rain.
Nat King Cole opens our baseball episode, and I know what you're thinking. Have you gone mad? Look, we know there's no baseball now, and there won't be any until May at the earliest. And being the producer of a travel podcast in a time of pandemic does feel more than a little like being the guy doing the ball scores the night of the second coming. But if you need the news, and you do, there are a lot of places to get it. By the way, this would be a good time to subscribe to your local daily newspaper. They are doing vital and heroic work, and they deserve our help. Still, there will one day be baseball again, and we're going to try to inject a little light into the darkness we're experiencing with a couple of baseball travel stories. The first, spring training, through the eyes of the veteran Associated Press baseball writer Ben Walker. This interview was recorded before the preseason was canceled halfway through. Why would anybody want to go to spring training? I mean, the games don't count.
Nope.
The players who are playing aren't necessarily the best players, the players that you're going to see, the players who everybody has, in their minds. So why would you want to go?
Well, only because it's the most magical time of the year, I'd have to say. It is so wonderful. People are always looking, fans are always looking to get that connection with the players. And there's no time you can do it better than spring training. You can get right up close to them. You can talk to them. You can have conversations with them. I know friends who've gone and they've brought their sons, their daughters who are catchers, 10-year-old, 12-year-old catchers. And now all of a sudden they're talking to Yadier Molina about how you block balls in the dirt. You can get up so close and personal. It is a wonderful time to go.
The players are more accessible. They're more willing to talk in general.
Much more relaxed, much calmer. Ballparks, the complexes are set up to allow that fan access. Everyone's usually very respectful. It's just a really wonderful time. I have to admit, I started going when I started becoming an AP baseball writer in the early 1980s, and I've been maybe 25 or 26 times since then. But my first thought, the first time I went, which was down to Florida, down to Pompano Beach, where the Texas Rangers were having their last year in a ballpark that had plywood fences with holes in them.
I remember when the Washington Senators trained at Pompano Beach. This is how I know most of the names of Florida towns is by the teams that trained there.
There's no doubt.
The Cincinnati Reds trained in Bradenton, Florida. I assume they do not any longer.
They do not. They're out there in Goodyear, Arizona. But all those years, and I grew up outside of Washington, so Pompano Beach. But I remember the first time I went, my first thought when I got there was, how in the world did I not do this as a kid? Why did I just badger my mom and dad to take me down there? And you are right. Those names are magical. When you hear Vero Beach or Clearwater or Mesa, and it used to be Hohokam Park where the Cubs played. Just wonderful, wonderful places, almost of a yesteryear of baseball that does not really exist once you start the regular season.
Now, in recent years, and now I'm, in recent years, now I'm talking the last 20 years, the teams have become aware of this.
Yes.
And so they've built these complexes with the idea that there will be people coming in, that it will be more of a profit center for the team. Has that taken away any of the magic of how spring training is different, or the spring training vibe?
I would say that a little bit it has, because certainly when I first started doing it, some of these parks were they were in shambles, some of them. I mean, they were not in great shape, but that added to the charm in a lot of ways. You see these star players, like you say, in Bradenton, like when the Pirates were there, or in Lakeland where the Tigers were and still are, 60 years later. The complexes now are built and designed to be fan-friendly, but that means they are newer. They are laid out in a way that kind of guides fans through, that you can't kind of just go wandering. Vero Beach, where the Dodgers were, there were no dugouts, there were no dugout roofs, there were no outfield fences with just palm trees out there, and the players literally had to walk from Little Holman Stadium about 200 yards on this little gravel path to the clubhouse, and there were no guards. Fans could just go up. You could go up and get whoever you wanted. You could get up and go get Steve Sachs or, Dodger players from Pedro Guerrero, Fernando Valenzuela, and that has been tempered back a little bit. That said, it's still geared to bring your fans down, whether they're coming down from Minnesota down to Fort Myers or the Red Sox fans. It's geared to let fans have access to the players they're going to see all year long.
So it's still that kind of, you mentioned Vero Beach. I mean, Vero Beach was Dodger Town for 60 years until they moved out, but what they left behind is like one of the fanciest towns in Florida now.
It's wonderful. Vero Beach is a special place. The players thought it was a little more remote. The Dodger players used to call it Zero Beach. But if you were a fan, Vero Beach was the place to go. It was my favorite place. My dad used to come with me probably 5 or 10 times, and he always would say, hey, can we go to Vero Beach this year? And the little places we like to go and whatnot. And again, you would literally could get up to the backstop and talk to the players as they were hitting. It was just, that was probably a really special time. You can't maybe get that close to the players anymore, 5 and 10 feet away, but you're there really close. A lot depends on when you go also. If you go before the games actually start, when practices are going on, there aren't many fans there. That's also a really neat time to go.
Does the fact that there are 2 major league teams and therefore there are games in the regular season in Florida and one in Arizona, does that change the vibe of spring training at all?
I don't think so, because for the most part, I think fans are going to spring training to see their team. The Cardinals in Jupiter, Florida have a tremendous following. You go into the parking lot at Joker Marchant Stadium in Lakeland where the Tigers are, and it's just all Michigan license plates. It used to be, in fact, it was so neat, they used to have a deal where outside the little stadium, these are little stadiums, they had a newspaper box for the Detroit Free Press. They flew in papers every single day so Michigan fans could read that day's newspaper. So there are little amenities like that. But for the most part, I think fans go to see their team. They go to Glendale to go see the Dodgers, or they go to Goodyear to see the Reds or the Indians. I don't think fans as much go around on tours of seeing the camps and the parks.
They're just going to see the hometown.
They want to see their team.
Close.
Who the prospects? Who's the young rookie? Who's the aging vet maybe trying to hang on? I think for the most part, the fact that the Rays and the Marlins and the Diamondbacks are in those states already, it really doesn't cut into anything at all.
Is the fact that, especially with today's conditioning, you don't need 6 weeks to round into shape to play, and it's already a long season. Does that contribute to the laid back vibe? Because we're taking like forever to get ready.
It does. And I think if you asked most players, they'll be like, oh my God, spring training is just way too long. And it does kind of go on for a long time, but it certainly allows you as a fan, if you want to go during practices, that's a good time. If you want to go to the first week of games, that's different than the second week and third week or the last week when the games are ramped up. So I do think it is more laid back because players have schedules. They only play a couple innings. They have off days. So I think the players, no one is ever in a rush at spring training.
Do you have favorite team or player stories that you managed to get that you only would have gotten because you were hanging around the spring training camp that you couldn't imagine having come up with
sure.
during the regular season?
Oh, sure. There are players. There was a player, over 60 now, so I've always loved, baseball history. My dad had always told me about big Ted Kluszewski, big slugger for the Reds.
Right.
And he was a guest instructor when the Reds used to train at Reds Land in Tampa. I got to know him a little bit, so every year I would go and spend a half hour just sitting on this log outside Field 2, just talking to Ted Kluszewski. I do remember, I will say this, my dad's favorite player of all time was Ted Williams. And Ted Williams used to be a hitting instructor when the Red Sox trained at Winter Haven, Florida. One year my dad comes down and I said, Dad, what do you want to do? What do you want to do this year? He goes, I really would love to go see Ted Williams. He said, I know you just did a story on him. I'd love to meet him. I'm like, Dad, that's great. We're going to go see Ted Williams. So 2 days later, we go see Ted Williams, and we're standing behind the batting cage, and I introduce him, and my dad is just overwhelmed because Ted Williams is a big guy. He's like John Wayne. He's just a really big guy. Somebody comes up to Ted Williams and says, "Hey, Ted, are we still going to dinner tonight?" And Ted's like, "Yeah, yeah." He goes, "Hey, let me write down where we're going." He looks at my dad, and he sees my dad has a pen in his pocket. He goes, "Give me that pen." It was my dad's 25th anniversary pen working at Johns Hopkins University. My dad is all too glad to give Ted Williams this pen. Ted Williams writes down the address, and Ted Williams puts that pen back in his own pocket. And my dad looks at me, and I just look at him like, "Hey, Dad, you wanted to see Ted, didn't you?" So my dad never got the pen back, but he said he could live with Ted Williams having his pen.
Okay, well that's good, and that makes you. I mean, you're a success completely in your own life. You got to introduce your dad to Ted Williams.
I did, and I would just say, you may not get to go if you go to meet, say, Al Kaline or Sandy Koufax. A lot of the greats are still instructors, but you'll get a chance. Willie Mays used to come to the Giants camp, Carl Yastrzemski with the Red Sox, Brooks Robinson, the great Brooks Robinson for the Orioles. But you'll get up close. You'll have interactions that you would never get a chance to have in June if you were at, say, Padres Pirates. You will not get what you will have in spring training when you can really get up close and talk to them.
Let's talk for a minute about fantasy camps that started, I guess, roughly 20, 25 years ago. You started getting these excursions that would-be athletes or wannabe athletes or old athletes could get to hang out with a major league club for a week or two in spring training. What is it like? Okay. What does that draw? What's that like?
I have to admit, when I first started hearing about those, I was like, "Oh my God!" Like just trying to recapture your event, and But I have to say, everybody I know who's ever gone to one comes back just crazed about it and how great it is. I remember talking to Supreme Court Justice Outa about this, and he went to a Phillies camp, and I remember talking to one of the guest instructors later. I said, "How could he hit?" He goes, he belongs on the bench, the one he's on now. So, but I would say the people who go to spring training and go to those fantasy camps, they're treated first class. The locker rooms, the stories, being able to play on the fields. It is supposedly a wonderful, wonderful thing. People love going to them. I will say that these camps usually end up with a real game in which some of the actual players play. And I used to think, oh, well, gosh, those players will be just, they'll just take it easy. These guys are paying $1,000 or $2,000 a week. No, they want to strike them all out and they want to embarrass them on the field a lot of times. I have to say, and I have seen that actually happen. But for someone to go back and say, gosh, I played on a field with Mike Piazza or something else, I think those seem to be very, very worthwhile trips.
Right, those memories remain. So yes. So I'll go back to another idea of a story. So can you think of something like during the season where you managed to get a story or something important because of a relationship that you might have forged in spring training, where if you hadn't been there talking to the player or manager or front office guy, that you never would have really gotten during the season?
The access you have down there is wonderful from a reporting standpoint. And I have to say, I've had a lot of success over the years with umpires. And many years ago, it occurred to me that I knew people in all facets of the game. I knew players, I knew general managers, a couple owners. I didn't know any umpires. So I went down one spring training thinking, I am going to meet an umpire, because I thought if I met one, I could meet many. And lo and behold, like the second day of spring training, I'm pulling into the hotel parking lot in Tampa, and I noticed getting out of a car, dressed in his full umpire uniform, was one of the umpires who had worked in Clearwater that day. They didn't bother, changing and showering up. They just wanted to go back. So it was an umpire I got to meet, and through this one umpire, I got to meet several and several more. And now, I know quite a few of them. But that kind of access, being able to meet an umpire during the season, cold, that would not have happened.
No, that's really hard. Yeah, yes. Right. But you have that kind of, and it's important because you're guaranteed to have a story that will center on umpires at some point during a close-fought season.
Exactly. And again, what you're able to do, I had a friend of mine, Larry Herndon, who played for the Tigers for a lot of years, hit some big home runs for the Tigers, and he was a hitting coach in the minors. I remember at the end of practice one day, I'd met him, we were going out to dinner, but I was walking through one of the batting cages, And he's like, you always talk that you could hit. Let me see something. So we started putting some balls up on a tee, and I was hitting them. And as I did, a couple other coaches came by just to see me. As they walked by, they're like, hey, this guy really can hit. And I would say that later in the season when I saw some of these coaches, it was very easy for them to say, oh, yeah, you're that guy we saw hit the
You're the guy who can hit.
Yeah, you're the guy.
So we will talk to you because you proved something there.
Some value, some worth. Exactly. So those are interchanges and exchanges that you would not have during the regular season, where things are everything matters so much more during the season. You don't really have that access that you get. But in spring training, those lazy days of late February and into March, those things can happen.
And so if you were advising somebody,
Sure.
taking the family to Florida or to Arizona,
Okay.
what kind of itinerary would you suggest for them? Or
Sure.
what advice would you give them?
First, I would tell you this. Do it. Go. You might think the money you might spend, say you go to 4 games, whether you go in, say, Target Field, Minnesota, beautiful there, or whether you go to, go see the Rockies or wherever you go, the money you would take there. Spring training is something you will talk about the rest of your lives, whether you go back once, or I guarantee if you go once, you'll want to go more than that. Arizona and Florida are very different. Arizona, 15 teams are there, and they're all in the Phoenix area. So if you were a fan, you could pick your every day where you wanted to go. Some places draw more. The Cubs draw very well. Yankees do, Cardinals do. But if you went to, like, say, Bradenton where the Pirates are, or to down to see the Rays, if you went to see the Tigers in Lakeland at certain times, especially early, you can go up there, you can buy a ticket. Now, tickets aren't cheap. They used to be, $5. I mean, you might be paying $20 and $30 now. But again, being able to sit close. Arizona, you could just fly out to Arizona and just plop down, fancy hotel or not, get your rent-a-car and just really have your choice of 15 teams.
Traveling around the Phoenix area, where there's a lot more miles to put on if you're in Florida.
Yeah, Florida, exactly. Florida, there's certain pockets. There's up like near Tampa where there's Clearwater and Dunedin. There's Fort Myers farther down. But if you want to see a specific team, I would tell you to go down there. I would probably tell you to go either in camp or the first week of spring training, because that's when not as many people are there. And that's when you have more of a feel. Towards the end of spring training, you're seeing more regular players, but the players are getting ready for the regular season. They're a little more serious. The games look more like games. I think the reason to go to spring training is to see baseball as it does not normally look. And you can see that in some parks. And again, Bradenton and Lakeland in Florida are absolutely two of my favorites.
Ben Walker is the chief baseball writer at the Associated Press, talking to us about spring training. Ben, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Warren, and we'll see you at spring training.
Oh, you bet.
It's Get Outta Here, the AP Travel Podcast. After a break, we go to the minors. Try not to think of it as being sent down. It's Get Outta Here. I'm Warren Levinson. Ted Anthony is the Director of Digital Innovation at the AP. He spent a lot of time watching minor league baseball the last few years. He wrote a piece last year about the marketing of the minor league game, but the travel's been almost as much about getting in touch with lesser-known towns and cities as about minor league baseball. Like the conversation we had with Ben Walker, this one was recorded a few weeks ago when the whole world was very different. If you love baseball like we do, you have to have a soft spot in your heart for minor league baseball. Unlike the major league game, it's cheaper to get there. It's more convenient. You can walk up, get tickets. Okay, so you're not looking at baseball at its highest level, but it's a heck of a lot better than you could play it, and it's still kind of fun to be around. Plus, it's really kind of a small-town game. Ted Anthony has made a practice with his wife and sons of traveling over the last 5 years or so and seeking out minor league baseball wherever they can. Ted, why do you do this?
Well, I think that there's something in the soul of minor league baseball that I have yet to quantify even after all these years going to the games, that it feels like it contains baseball in a very real way. I mean, we've mythologized baseball in this country for so many decades, and some of the things we come up with are accurate, some are not. For example, it's very perceived as a rural pastoral game, but in fact a lot of the beginnings of the game were in the city. And when you go to minor league baseball games, you feel like not quite in the past, but you feel connected to the past, and you feel connected to the ways that baseball used to be, albeit playing out in a very modern context.
Talk to me about some of the places you've actually been to and seen games.
We have been to Akron, Ohio, where we saw the Akron Rubber Ducks, who are named after and their mascot is styled after an angry rubber duck, which is both interesting in a mascot sense and also calls back to the rubber and tire industry in Akron.
Right.
We have been in Burlington, Vermont, where one of the oldest baseball stadiums in the country that's still standing is still used by the minor league team there, and it's from, I believe, about 1913, and it feels like stepping into 1913. We have edged our way across New York State, across Pennsylvania, all kinds of places. One of the plans we have for this year, although my boys don't know it yet, is we're going to fly down for the weekend to Alabama to see the new team, the Rocket City Trash Pandas.
Trash Pandas.
Trash Pandas. They were.
We're going to talk about the marketing in a bit, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. But yeah, so it's another minor league trip.
It is, and
I don't think the boys download the podcast, so we should be okay.
I think we're safe. But look, one of the things about minor league baseball, and I for a story last year, I interviewed a longtime executive, and he said this wonderful saying that's used all across the leagues. He said, "We're not in the baseball business; we're in the circus business." And what he means by this is the minor league teams and their towns don't have a lot of control over what happens on the field. That's playing out on behalf of and by the major leagues. Players are passing through. It's hard to develop affection for someone who's going to be called up at any time and disappear. So what they do control is the experience around that. They control the people doing things in the stands, the contests between innings, the way that the gear is given away, the food and the unique microbrews that are served. So they very much are in the business of taking care of the circus, and the baseball on the field will take care of itself. It happens in the same place. It's all part of the same entertainment, but it's a little bit of a different experience because they really ramp up the stuff that's happening off the field.
And some of that circus stuff has leaked into the major league level. I mean, the sausage race in Milwaukee, for example, seems like such a minor league thing, and yet, the people, they love it. I am old enough to remember being talked about, not old enough to remember to actually experienced it, when, for instance, players moving to the major leagues at inopportune times for competitive reasons of the minor league teams mattered a lot. For instance, the fans of the Minneapolis Millers were just utterly incensed when the New York Giants called Willie Mays up in 1951 while they were in the middle of their league pennant drive. But it feels a little bit like the minor league teams aren't as connected to the major league teams as they used to be. Am I wrong about that?
I think they're still connected in the sense that if you care about a team, you're going to want to go venture out and see its minor league iterations so that you see what's coming up. One of the things that struck me when I went to see the Altoona Curve for the first time about 6 years ago, they're the AA affiliate of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we went to see future prospects, many of which eventually ended up on the Pirates. But everybody I talked to did not seem to be from Altoona. They were people who were coming in from various places across the state to see what was in store for the Pirates. So I do have a sense – I don't have any science behind it, but I do have a sense that while some of the fan base or the attendance from these games may be local, that you're getting a lot of people who are trying to follow the teams through, short season single A, double A, triple A until they get there and see what's coming down the pike.
Right, looking to the future of the big club. So – it used to be the way these teams branded themselves where they were just sort of a junior version of the big league club. If you were in Richmond and you were a farm team of the Braves, you were the Richmond Braves. If you were in Des Moines and you were a farm team of the Chicago Cubs, you were the Iowa Cubs. You did that whole story about rebranding of minor league baseball. What sort of stuff did you come across?
It was absolutely fascinating. I'm a person who's fascinated by American towns and communities and how they brand themselves and put out their stories. And I ran across this branding company in San Diego called Brandiose. And it's these two guys who are wonderfully smart and plugged into popular culture who essentially go into these small and mid-sized cities and help minor league teams rebrand to something that, A, will be more compelling for attendance, but B, will very much reflect the communities from which they came. And they come out with these wonderful mascots that populate gear that then sells a great deal for the team. And one of them
you started with the Trash Pandas, so tell me about how that came to be.
I will. So the Trash Pandas were actually rebranded by Brandiose. It was a team elsewhere in Alabama. and they decided that they were going to relocate to near Huntsville, Alabama, which is a center for rockets and space.
Right. NASA's got a big facility there.
Exactly.
Space Camp is there.
Yes. So they went in, Brandeis went in, and they started poking around. They interviewed people. They talked about what they cared about. And they came up with a trash panda is vernacular for a raccoon. And what they decided was, okay, here were all these people who for generations had essentially cobbled together the ability to go into space, built rockets out of their own ingenuity and out of, not quite random things, but certainly there was a sense of improvisation. And at the same time, a raccoon is a great animal for a mascot and raccoons are perceived as resourceful. They'll pull things together. They'll go around and scavenge things and put something together. So they came up with a mascot that is the Rocket City Trash Pandas, which features in one of its iterations a raccoon in a garbage can that is taking off toward space like a rocket. And from what I understand, this did not initially go over well.
I imagine a lot of these didn't go over well. The baseball purists would say this is about baseball, not about all this, merch stuff.
And I think that there's a community sensibility too. It's like, do we want to be called the Trash Pandas in our community? However, they started selling the gear, and the gear sold tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in the first several weeks. And all of a sudden, everybody's really excited about the Trash Pandas, who are going to play their first game, if memory serves, in about 4 or 5 weeks. And so this has happened a number of times. The Brandeis, people are suspicious at first; they think that it doesn't quite reflect, but almost always those brands resonate, and it's they have the Gulf shrimp, and the Akron rubber ducks were part of that.
Right.
The Hartford yard goats.
Right.
They helped out with the Allentown, Pennsylvania iron pigs, which is named after pig iron, which is a byproduct of the steel industry. But of course, in the last few years, there's been a large bacon craze, so pig iron became
pig products,
a fighting strip of bacon. So it's very lively. And I will say one thing. You say correctly that years ago this used to be more small versions of major league teams were the minor league teams. But even before that, in like the early part of the 20th century, there were these teams that were very, very unique. I think one of them was called, I'm not sure of the state, but maybe the Minnesota Furniture Makers, things like that.
Oh, yeah. That's the sort of thing that you can find dotted all through professional sports.
Exactly.
The last vestige, I suppose, being last vestiges being the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, very true. But I want to tell you about one more Brandeis project before we move on that I think is absolutely wonderful. So there is a team in Spokane, Washington, and this team was branded after Indians, which, as we know, can be a very contentious subject in the field of sports.
Right. They were the Spokane Indians for like 100 years.
And when Brandeis went in to start to work with the team, everybody was very, very hesitant about what to do with this mascot and this branding. And what ended up happening was, in conjunction with the team, Brandeis, they reached out to the Spokane tribe of Indians, and they involved them in the process. And what it ended up creating was a partnership in which the language of that particular tribe was incorporated into places in the ballpark, was actually incorporated into one of the alternate uniforms, has the team's name written in the script of that tribe's language in Salish. And so instead of doing something that would veer more toward parody or toward something that would alienate people from the community, they brought the stakeholders in, and they created something entirely new that was absolutely fascinating.
Wow. Hello, summer camps. Are you listening? So one more thing. When you are traveling and you make these side trips to places like Batavia, New York, or Spokane, do you find yourself finding other attractions or other charms of the town outside of the ballpark? Or are you really kind of laser focused on getting to see what's going on in the games?
Well, as you know, Warren, in our industry we have something called a news peg, which is something that's happening that's a reason to write about something. And although my family absolutely loves baseball and loves minor league baseball, in some ways that's a news peg for visiting these cities. We find an excuse, and then we go and we poke around in the corners of cities. We find things mostly independent fast food joints, I'm afraid to say, but all kinds of interesting things that we never would have seen otherwise. So the minor league ballpark, and the lower leagues the better, because it's a town we might never make it to, but the minor league ballpark becomes a vehicle by which we can explore all these new communities and get to. I want to make sure that that my kids who have lived overseas for a number of years get to know their own country better on a really fundamental level. And I can't think of anything better than to use minor league baseball to do that.
Ted Anthony is Director of Digital Innovation at the Associated Press. Ted, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I was actually inspired to buy a Spokane Indians cap in Salish. I've got like 20 baseball caps. This one's my favorite.
Satan was pitching that apple. It looked as though he might fan 'em all. But then Joshua let go with a mighty blow, and he blasted one right at the wall, shouting, "Come along and let's play ball."
And now, my favorite trip. We're going to start thinking of the time of our travels, if we haven't already, as BP and AP, before pandemic and after pandemic. Back in the BP days of 2019, James May spent 3 months shooting a travel documentary in Japan. As befits the former co-host of Top Gear, one of his notable impressions involves cars.
There's quite a lot of things about driving that I like in Japan. Everything is clean. It's not actually illegal to have a dirty car or lorry in Japan, but it's so shameful. It's considered embarrassing to have a dirty car. So everything is always very clean. And the Japanese never blow the horn, because that's rude. Whereas, in Britain especially, everybody's using it as a form of admonishment or to say, no, you're wrong. But the Japanese don't. They will just wait. They'll probably wait until they starve to death rather than go beep. I don't even know why they put horns on Japanese cars. They might as well put machine guns on them. You're just not going to use it.
May left Japan with a lot of memories. He also left behind some things. I mean, the usual catalog of stuff, phone charger, motorcycle jacket, and one unusual item. A drone.
That's down in Shikoku somewhere. Where it's in the bit where we're exploring the valley where the gods had their dance that made the sun come out. And you can row a boat down the river. And the camera crew got there. They've got a big drone and a little drone. The little drone is amazing, but they got it up, and there are these trees that are overhanging the sheer sides of this valley that was cut millions of years ago glacially. And the trees grow right to the top and hang out over the water, and you manage to crash it into there. So there's no way you can get it down. You can't climb up the cliff face. If you go from the other side, the tree's quite a small one, and climbed up, it would snap and you'd fall to your death. So it's just going to be there. It'll become like Tutankhamun's remains. It's just going to be there forever.
Former Top Gear co-host James May is the host of a 6-part travelogue series about his travels to Japan last year. It's available on Amazon Prime. And that's the show. Get Outta Here is a production of the Associated Press in partnership with Westwood One, produced under the supervision of Nikessa Moody and Peter Costanzo. I'm Warren Levinson. Stay safe, wash your hands, and we'll see you next time.